This is my signature pattern, the Hopper Juan. This is a pattern that I came up with a long time ago, probably 12 years ago or so, and one of my first, actually the first patterns that was picked up by Montana Fly Company and still being produced today. It's great dry dropper setup. You can run a big heavy tungsten bead behind this thing. You can do a lot of things. This is just a fun pattern to tie and a fun pattern to fish, no matter where you are. If you're fishing this thing, it means it's summer, which means good things. So I'm going to show you how to tie it, and we're going to start off by choosing a 2x long hook. It can be a light wire hook, which works better, or a 2x or a 2x long heavy hook, which works fine as well, in case you need a little bit more wire strength for you. So I'm going to start off with 6/0 thread. It can be whatever you choose, UTC 140 or a 6/0 in any other thread in a tan coloration. I'm just going to coat this hook shank with a little bit of thread on there. And what I'm doing is I'm going to start with 2 pieces of foam. 2 mil foam. You can use 3 if needed, but 2 mil works great for what I'm doing here. And I've used the River Road Creation cutters for years and years, and I've only had one wear out on me, but to say it wore out is actually not true. I messed it up. So I tried fixing it and it didn't work. So, but what I'm using is the Chernobyl cutter, and this is with the tapered end on one side, and the other end is the straight side. So I'm just starting with 2 mil foam, and this is my favorite color combination. This is the tan on bottom and brown on top. So you can do whatever colors you want. There's endless varieties that you can go with. This is my favorite. So I'm going to start by again putting a little bit of thread on there, and then I take the hook out of the vise, and I'm just going to measure with the hook gap, and I'm just going to pierce it right up in that area and get that onto the hook shank. Once I do that, I can get my hook back in the vise and work my way back. We use super glue on this. You have to use super glue anytime you're putting foam on something round. It wants to spin, so we got to make sure that we're going to keep this thing from spinning. So I'm going to place this. This is very important that you place, and I'm going to make 3 wraps. So my first wrap, snug it up. Second, a little tighter. Third, snug it up. I just get that placed on there on top for now. Now, 6/0 thread I like because it doesn't break on you. 8/0 will break on you. You don't want to pull too hard on these segments. When you're pulling to tighten, you might cut the thread, but you want to have it strong enough that it's going to hold. So the next thing I like is some super glue of some sort. I like this with the brush. That way I can just touch where I need it, and it works well for me. Once I do that, I'm going to go ahead and match that top portion of foam and place it where I need it to be. And then again, 1 snug, 2 snug, 3 snug. You can throw a 4th if you need to. So once I have both of those on there, I'm going to go ahead and sneak back on that hook shank, and all I do is bring those up and proceed my thread forward. Now you need to go ahead and plan out what we're going to do is we're going to put a segment in the back end, there, and then the front end. So you got to make sure you know what and where you're going to be at for your segments. So 1 snug, 2 snug, 3 snug. Now at this point, my super glue is placed right in those little pockets there. Just a little glue to hold and keep things together. So again, right up on top, 1 snug, a little tighter, 2, and I'm pulling it towards my chest when I bring those towards me. Once we do that, get back on that hook shank. Now at this point I need to find out where I need to be, so I'm gonna divide that into divide it into half right here. So 3, snug it up. A little bit more super glue. Again, repeat everything. So this first portion is pretty easy. Squeeze, tug towards your chest, 3 times minimum. Now this is where it gets a little more interesting, up at the front. What I'm going to do is I'm going to untwist my thread so it's flatter and not so round. This is where we got to tie off the bottom piece. So I'm going to bring it, again, snug, 2, 3, I'll do one more. And then the scissors that I use on this portion are a little bit different. Most of the time I'm using my Dr. Slick razor scissors for everything I do. However, the blades are tapered on these ones, and even though they're thin, my preference is to go back to the micro tip scissors that have a smaller, thinner blade. That way I can come in. What I got to do is I got to cut it right here below the hook eye. So I'm going to come through, and I'm just going to gather this and pull as close as I can there, and I'm going to cut. What that leaves me with is, I always call these little nubs on the sides. I'm going to cut those down just a little bit more so they're not so big. And while I'm doing this, and especially if you use the UTC thread, while I'm doing my cuts, all of my thread is unwinding, and when it unwinds it's going to be flatter. In this case it unwinds and it is flat, just not as flat as the UTC in this case. But I'm going to go ahead and gather all of that, wrap it down, and I've gathered and I've been able to cover up most of that foam. If I need to put a few more wraps, I can certainly do that. This will all get cleaned up at the front end and on the back end of everything. So right there, I'm going to proceed with more glue. Bring this one forward. 3 wraps, 4 wraps. Now I've finished everything on the bottom end. I need to sneak this thread back to the previous segment right up on top. So I'm just going to bring my bobbin over and get back in that portion right here. That's where everything's going to be stacked up. So now what I need to do is I need to make sure that I'm not going to crowd or put too much material on that segment. So what we'll have to do here is we've got to put our wing. Now you actually do an underwing. I'm using, and you can skip this, but I'm using this Etha wing from Montana Fly Company. It's been on the original for a long time. If you want to use something different, you certainly could. Just make sure it floats and it doesn't gather water and sink, or help it to sink. That's the key. But this is a little foam based. I'm going to put it up there a couple thread wraps, and then I'm going to trim this down, and then we're going to stack some hair. You can add flash at this point if you wanted to. You don't have to. Add some flash, gives you a nice look on your underneath your wing. Now for the wing I prefer to use elk hair, and I like a stiff elk hair, so like a cow is my preference. You can use bull if you need to, but my preference is the cow. I like the way it flares. So what I'm looking for is a nice patch of hair that looks similar to this, long enough fibers to work with, and it's gonna be in this case cow elk hair. So that's what I'm going to use. I already gathered some and stacked it, put it in my stacker. When it comes off the hide, it has a little bit of curve to it, and what I'm trying to do is once I get it in my stacker, I'm trying to line up everything so I don't have to fight the curve. So as you can see, most of it's tapered downward. In this case, I'm going to press my thumb and roll it just a little bit so I get all of that taper going the same way. In this case right here, like this. Alright, so once I get that on there, I'm going to measure the length of that wing, and I'm going to lay in here. Again, this is where the 6/0 thread comes into play. So push down to tighten, a little firmer. 3, 4 wraps, 5 or 6 wraps will work. Once you have that there, you can gather all this right up on top, and that hair flares nice and neat for you there. Now I'm going back to my regular scissors that I normally use. I'm going to try to gather all of this up and make one nice clean cut. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you're able to, go ahead and do that. I'm just going to cut right here and clean up that mess. So I got it all under control. Everything's tied in. I don't have to be super neat on this front end, on the top end. I just need to make sure it's tied down. Good. So once we have that there, I'm going to go ahead and make sure everything's cut correctly. And then I'm going to come back with my glue, and I'm going to put a little bit of glue right in the butts of those. That way it helps to hold everything together right in there. And then I'm going to hit it just a little bit up on the top of the foam. I'm going to bring back my foam piece, a couple wraps right there, just to get that up and placed correctly. So now I'm going to taper these on this front, on the top portion of this, and I'm going to make sure everything looks good. For legs, you can use whatever legs you want. My preference used to be rubber legs, but now I'm going back to the speckled sexy legs. MFC makes those. You can find others that do this, make this material, and you can use this, or you can use whatever you like. I'm going to go ahead and tie in 2 pieces just on my side, and then once I have them secured, I can bring them to the back side. Once I place them, I can put a few more wraps, and if they're long, I'm going to cut them, and I'll come back and trim these all up as we're finishing up everything. So I have some long legs there coming out the sides. I'm going to come back and trim those here in a little bit. Now you can finish up as at this point if you wanted to. The only thing I suggest is putting in an indicator piece of material. What I like to use is the hot pink. An Antron type or something similar works really well for me. You can pick it up on the water easier. Hot pink or something bright like that. So I'm just going to lay that right in that little area right there. I'm going to put a couple turns of thread on it. Now you can whip finish, but since I have my glue with me, I'm going to come back and I'm going to paint my thread with super glue. Make sure my legs are out of the way. All I'm going to do is just wrap that over, and that should work for you to keep everything together. While I'm cutting everything and trimming everything, I'm just leaving it there. I'm going to come over here and trim this. My glue should be setting. I'm going to cut this down. It doesn't have to be super long, just enough to be able to pick it up off on the water. Leg-wise, we're going to come in here and cut those down on the front end, shorter, and again on the back end, just a little longer than the overall body for the overall length. So once I'm done there, I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread on the back here. Again, I just cut it because I put super glue on it, and that super glue should be able to hold everything together. So once you're done, this is it. This is the fly right here. So when you're fishing it, put on a decent amount of fly floatant, and then it should be able to float for a long time. Even though it's made of foam, it still soaks up water, and you still need to treat it, especially if you put a dropper below it. It's going to have trouble holding that up, moving in that water. So put floatant on this thing, and you're able to fish it for a long time. If you want flash, you can certainly put flash. And this is a size 8. This is one of my favorite sizes. It's not too big, not too small. It's a medium size, and again, it holds up an indicator fairly well. So that's it. That's the Hopper Juan. That's the original one that I came out with a long time back, probably 10, 12 years ago or so. So tie some up, fish it, have some fun, especially during the summer. Thanks.